All right, so in this video, we're going to be graphing, talking about how to graph an equation. And so on the right side here, you see this is the setup you're going to use for your notebook page, and I'll be taking the notes along with you. And then on the left side, I have my TI84 calculator. Now, it doesn't matter which version of the TI84 you have, it's still going to be the same keys to do the same actions. So you're going to also need some colors because we're going to be highlighting keys on the graph. I'm going to be using different colors, and actually, so I'll be using 4 different colors here, just so you can kind of get used to where some of the keys are located, and you have this guide. So first thing we're going to do with our calculator, in order to graph, you need to become familiar with this idea of this y equals menu. So I'm going to jump back and forth, and you'll see my calculator disappear for a minute. And actually, I'm going to highlight the first menu we're going to use is the y equals. And so I'm going to highlight, actually, in the same color, the button on the actual keypad. And I'm going to write in some information here, getting my calculator back up. So when our calculator is on and we press the y equals button, what ends up happening, and mine's in color, some of yours may be in color and some of yours may not, but I end up with this whole list of y equals. So now if I scroll down, these are all the different spots, and so on my calculator I have 10 spots where I can put in 10 different equations. We're only going to work with one today, but the y1, 2, 3 just tells you which number equation you're writing in. So the important thing to note, and we're going to pick this on our notes here, is that we have to write our equations in this space with y isolated. So if you think about the equations we've done so far with linear equations, some of our equations have y isolated and some of them do not. So we're going to write our equation in here, and if you notice the buttons I'm going to press here, we're going to do the equation y equals 2x minus 5. So the y equals part is already taken care of, so I'm just going to type in the equation 2, and then I'm going to make sure to use the x key up here by the alpha, 2x minus 5. So the other thing to note here, we want to write our equations with y isolated, and we're going to use, and anytime I put a box around something that's saying it's the key that says it has an x, it has a t, then it has a theta, and then it has an n, all of those are for different purposes, but that's the key we're going to use to get our variable. So we can use all different types of equations, but right now all we're wanting is that x to show up, and so that's the setting we have on our graph. Okay, so the next piece here, and we're going to highlight this on our notes in a different color, is the zoom key. So the zoom key you'll find right in the middle there, up at the top. And what the zoom key does, let me bring my calculator back up. What the zoom key does is, now we have an equation in. My zoom key is going to help me decide what kind of viewing window I want to see for my graph. So there's lots of different options here, and you can see like Z, box, zoom in, zoom out. The one that we want to most traditionally stick with is actually number 6. And so we're going to write that down in our notes. So we're going to select normally 6, which is Z, so zoom, standard. And what that's going to give us is our standard normal viewing window, or normal graph. And so what that's going to give you is, for an x-axis and y-axis, that goes from -10 to +10. So we're going to select zoom 6, which is standard, zoom standard, for our x-axis to go from -10 to +10, and our y-axis to go -10 to +10. So I'm going to select, you can either scroll down, or you could just press enter, or you can just hit number 6. And it'll pop my graph up here, and if you notice the marks here, if you counted them, there's 10, 10, -10, -10, and my graph shows up on the display. Now, if I were in a different menu, so if I press second and quit and I'm back on my main screen and I wanted to go back to my graph, and this is the next button we'll take care of, we would press the graph button. So to view your graph, and so I'm going to go with green here. You don't have to use the same colors as me, but my graph key is how I get back to my graph. So to press this to display your axes with equations from y equals. So bring my calculator back up. So I'm on my graph screen, and there's lots of things we can do from here, and we'll talk about them. But first thing, the feature we want to talk about first here is how we can actually see the points that make up this graph. So what we're going to look under, and it's listed on as our next topic here, is to look at a table. So we want to see a table displaying all the different, well, not all of them, but displaying the points that make up this line. Because right now from this view, it's really hard for me to tell exactly what points are on the line. So how we can do that is that our graph can display a table. And so we're going to go back to our notes here to mark this first. And I'm actually going to go back to the same color as graph, because what this is it's actually under, or actually above, and I'm just going to circle it so you can see it. It's actually above the graph key. If you look right above the graph key, it says table. And so you're going to have to press second and then table. And actually what we should do here is let's mark the second key with a different color. So second would be here, and then table is above the graph key. So second table, what that will do is you press this if you want to see a table of x and y values that are part of that equation. So those are the values that if you plugged into your equation, you would get, sorry, they would make the equation true. So if I press on my calculator, second, second, and I know second is active because I see the little up arrow there. And now I'm going to press graph, and what I'll end up with is a nice little table. Your table may not start at 0, so hopefully you're working along with me with your calculator. But what you get is all these different x, y pairs. So 0, -5, 1, -3, 2, -1. All of these are points on your line. So if you were now going to graph this by hand, this is where you would find that information. Okay, the last piece, and I'm going to go back to, sorry, I should just press my graph. The last piece here that we're going to explore is well, actually, I'm going to show you really quickly. We're not going to write this one down, but if you press the trace button, what you actually can do is also move along. So how else can you see points? You can press trace, and you can use your right and left arrows to move along the line, and you'll notice your cursor. Now, if I keep pressing, my cursor has gone off the screen, but I can see the coordinates here. And so I know -13, well, my y's only go to -10, so I need to come back to the right. So your cursor can go off the screen. If it gets lost, take a look at the coordinates and figure out, is it off to the right side or is it off to the left side, so you know which way to scroll. So trace will let you trace the line. But the last button we want to talk about here, and let me highlight it, and then I'll show you. Are we out of colors? Oh, there's a color we haven't used. Oh, no. There's a color we haven't used. Is the window button. Go back to our black. And the window button, what that is going to do is let you change the x and y axis values. So basically, when you look at your graph screen, we could call this your viewing window. So the window button, and that's right next to the y equals button, is going to show you what your window is set up for. Now, there's lots of options here, but the ones I want you to pay attention to are the first 6 here. And it's the x min, the x max, the x scale, and then you see the same in the y values. So what these are, and I'm going to change to the smaller pen here. is the x-min, you might be able to guess, is the smallest value on the x-axis. So how low, how far to the left actually, do you want your x-axis to extend? The x-max is the opposite, the highest value, the maximum value on your x-axis. And the last one, the XSCL, is the scale. So this is really your intervals, your interval markings, or your interval marks that are on the x-axis. So it's basically, that's why it's SCL, is because it's your scale. So if I go back to this graph, and the y's would be the same value, same idea, except for their y values. So if I change the x-min, I'll change the x-min to 0, and I'm going to change the y-min to 0. Now when I press graph again, what I'm going to see, if I only go from 0 to 10 on my x-axis and 0 to 10 on my y-axis, what am I really seeing here? Well, I'm only seeing the first quadrant. So messing around with the window, you can see the different effects. And so I'm going to go from -20 to 10. And if I change my x scale to 2, and I'll keep my y scale at 1, when I go to the graph, what you'll see is now each of these marks here, instead of representing 1 on my x-axis, is 2, and my y marks still represent 1. So you can kind of see the different effects that the scale will have. So it is important to note exactly what these are. But if I go back to zoom like we did earlier and I do zoom standard, it's going to take me back to that +10 is the max, -10 is the minimum on both, and there's a mark every one. So that's the basics as far as graphing goes and how we're going to use those buttons up in the top row. The only one you may want to note, may want to write yourself a note and say we didn't use, is the trace button. But hopefully now you feel a little bit more comfortable kind of navigating and knowing what those buttons do for you.